In 1953, a lacrosse babysitter disappeared with hardly a trace. Her name was Evelyn Hartley. This story generated more interest than any of the others. Within 24 hours of our broadcast, police received 17 calls with information about the babysitter's disappearance. In May, the authorities went to Pickwick, Minnesota, in search of a car that was reportedly buried with the body. There were hopes that the Evelyn Hartley case would finally be solved, but to this day, the Hartley story remains one of the greatest mysteries in the Coulee region. It was the big game, La Crosse State Teachers College against River Falls. Homecoming, October 24th, 1953. It seemed nearly everyone in the city was going to be there. It would be a good time, especially if La Crosse won. Professor Viggo Rasmussen was just one of nearly 1,000 people who were going to that game. Rasmussen had made plans nearly a week before to have the daughter of one of his colleagues babysit his 20-month-old daughter. The babysitter's name was Evelyn Hartley, a 15-year-old Central High School junior. She had babysat for the Rasmussens before.
Evelyn lived with her family here at 1533 Johnson. About 6:30 that night, Professor Rasmussen arrived to pick up Evelyn for her babysitting job. The Rasmussen home was just 5 minutes away.
The Rasmussen home was located in what was called the Coulee Addition. They had lived in their new home at 2415 Heschler Drive for only 3 months. When they arrived, Mrs. Rasmussen gave Evelyn her instructions for the night. She was to put the baby to bed at 7 o'clock and to cover her at 7:15. It would be an easy night for Evelyn, and she would have plenty of time for her homework. At 6:45, the professor, his wife, and their 7-year-old daughter left the house for the game, not knowing that it would be the last time anyone would ever see Evelyn. Call it a mother's intuition, but at 7 o'clock that night, Mrs. Hartley had a feeling she should call her daughter. But she decided not to, since Evelyn had left home only a half hour before, and Evelyn had a habit of always calling home at 8:30. So Mrs. Hartley decided to wait, not knowing that at that very moment, a prowler was lurking outside the Rasmussen home.
I do remember checking some of the backyards in the neighborhood, and we did find some footprints appeared to be made by a tennis shoe in the fresh dirt out there behind the houses. And we suspected that person was prowling the area and in that house where the Hartley girl was babysitting.
When Evelyn failed to call her parents at 8:30, they became worried, and after a short time, Mr. Hartley decided to call his daughter at the Rasmussen home, but there was no answer. He called again and even checked the number in the telephone book, but still no answer. This was not normal, so Richard Hartley decided to go to the Rasmussen home to investigate.
Hartley told police it was about 20 minutes after 9 when he arrived. He said he knocked on all the doors and windows, but he got no answer. But looking through a window, he could see one of Evelyn's shoes and her glasses lying on the living room floor. Hartley began to look around the house, and then he found the open basement window.
These are original police photographs. At the foot of the stairs, Hartley found his daughter's shoe. Climbing the stairs, entering the living room, he found the other shoe and his daughter's glasses lying on the living room floor. Walking into the baby's room, he found the baby fast asleep, still uncovered. Not knowing what to think now, Hartley left the home, crossed the street to the home of Frank Lindner, and asked for help.
When I went to the door and talked to him, he said he had been in the habit of calling his daughter when she was out on babysitting jobs, and he did that, and no response, so he came out here to see what was wrong. He said he looked around the house and he says, there's something wrong over there. I just don't know what it is, but I asked him if we should call the police, and he said, I sure think we should. I asked him if he wanted me to do it, and he said, would you please do it for me? So I called the police, and that's a few minutes later they were here, and that was the beginning of the story.
The call to police was logged in at 9:49.
And we received a call of a missing girl or missing person over on the east end of town. So we proceeded to go over there. And it was close to quitting time, so I mentioned to my partner that we should get this cleared up in about 10 minutes and we'll be able to go home on time.
Don Schoenfeld and his partner, Ken Johnson, were the first to arrive on the scene. When they got the call, they were watching the football game from their squad car. It took only minutes to get to the Rasmussen home.
When we got out there, we found, I believe we found Mr. Hartley present. In looking the situation over, we found that somebody had entered the house on the south side of the house through the basement window. I recall seeing a shoe at the base of the basement stairs. And the girl was gone. There was a young child, if I'm not mistaken, left in the house, in the bedroom, in the crib. We figured we had something fairly serious at that time, so we notified headquarters, and they contacted the investigation bureau and they sent out a detective.
That night, police conducted a search of the area. They found blood stains outside the basement window, and a neighbor reported hearing screams in the area about 7:15. The search was eventually called off about 1 in the morning, and the Rasmussens were allowed to return to their home.
I think we did the best we could for that night, and finally the detective said, well, come back in the morning and clear it up then. And we left the scene the way it was, and we protected the scene and left it the way it was until the following morning. And after that, the detective bureau took over, and they were back out there the next day.
The lacrosse victory over River Falls topped the local news the next morning, but word of the babysitter's strange and mysterious disappearance began to filter out. By noon, nearly 1,000 people had converged on the Rasmussen home to see where it happened and to help with the search.
Fairly early in the morning, there was an announcement out by the police department for volunteers. And it seems to me it was around close to noon when the chief of police came out here and stood over there on the steps of the house and gave instructions to all the people that volunteered. And there was a lot of them because they were lined up clear across the street here in our yard. And put us in groups and sent us out in various directions to do a search. I took a group up to French Island. And we walked across French Island following their instructions, what to look for, and then reported back, and others were doing the same thing. Actually, that went on for a couple days, several days.
Bob Mark was one of the searchers.
The call went out, so everybody was doing their duty, and everything that we saw, we picked up, and we turned over. And everything thought it was going to be the piece of evidence that was going to break the case. And of course, I was about, I would say 20, 22. There were old people, there were young people, a lot of kids running around. It was a circus. I was about, I would say 20, 22. There were old people, there were young people, a lot of kids running around. It was a circus.
Despite the crowds, police were able to find plenty of clues. Footprints made by a size 11 tennis shoe were found in the neighborhood leading to the Rasmussen home. Signs of an attempted forced entry were found on a neighbor's house, and pry marks were found on one of the Rasmussens' bedroom windows. Willard Sill was one of the original detectives on the case.
Well, from everything that we know, apparently somebody was prowling around the neighborhood. His footprints disclosed that there were prints in other areas in that Rasmussen house. And my belief is that he wasn't pointed toward any one individual, that he was just prowling and apparently saw this gal alone and thought that would be a proper place to enter and proceed to enter and abducted Evelyn Hartley.
Do you think he was after the girl, or could have been he was breaking in and happened on the girl, or?
I believe that he saw the girl. I think that he could have seen the girl from the outside. So apparently he knew what he was getting into.
Inside the Rasmussen home, a footprint made by a dirty shoe was found on the living room floor. It, too, was made by a size 11 tennis shoe. Signs of a struggle were minimal here, but somehow Evelyn's abductor was able to force her downstairs and out the same basement window he had entered by. Whatever happened outside the house happened at about 7:15. Several neighbors in the area reported hearing screams at about that time. Elvin Soderbach and his wife were in their porch when they heard them.
Well, about either 2 or 3 screams. And then the last one was kind of choked off, or shut off in the middle. And I thought some of the neighbor kids were being punished or something, and been taken in the house and closed door slammed. And we let it go at that, not thinking anything about it until the next day when we heard what had been going on. But it came from down that direction, and I turned around. My wife was in the kitchen. She heard the scream all the way through the house. It carried that well to the kitchen.
What did it sound like? A playful scream? Or?
No, it didn't. It sounded like stop or get away from me, or that kind of a scream.
You saw a car then at about 7:30?
Yes, it was an old sedan, dark tan, I would say, about the color of your jacket.
Meanwhile, outside the Rasmussen home, police found more signs of a violent struggle. Aside from the pool of blood with human hair, blood stains were also found on the side of the Rasmussen home. One of them held the imprint of a human hand. From here, the bloody trail led around the corner to the Fantel home at 2310 Cooley Drive, where more blood was found smeared on the side of their garage. Blood was also found next door on the southeast corner of the Eugene Downer home at 2311 Cooley Drive. The blood found here seeped into a window well, and police believed the victim's body must have laid here for some time. When shown this, Mrs. Hartley told a reporter on the scene that she knew her daughter was no longer alive.
Do you think Evelyn died right outside of that house, or was she alive for a while?
I have no way of knowing that, but I would think that she lived for a while.
Taken hostage.
Right.
There wasn't enough. Did you ever get out to the house and look at the blood that was found?
No, I personally didn't examine that.
I feel that there wasn't enough blood to be fatal out there. Looks like she had a bloody nose. I was told that the blood on the house came from her nose.
I have read those reports too.
So she had a bloody nose, someone slapped her.
Yeah.
That's how the guy got the blood on his hand.
Could be possible. Could be some other bruise that caused her to bleed too.
From the Downer home, police and later bloodhounds were able to follow the trail until it vanished at the end of Cooley Drive.
Well, I feel that she was taken by a car from the area. And that would be the case, I don't know. Logical place to go would be south from that location. Over the course of the years, we had, or at the time, we had reports from down south, the Goose Island area, heard screaming in that area.
By Monday, the newspaper had the story, and everyone in the region knew about the strange disappearance of Evelyn Hartley. Police had already begun bringing in suspects. According to the paper, a La Crosse man had spent the night in jail after his car was mistakenly traced to a suspicious vehicle spotted in Sparta. It was about 2 a.m. the same night Evelyn disappeared. According to reports, the car, an early 1940s model, was parked by the La Crosse River Bridge, but sped away when spotted by police. A check of the license plate traced the car to the La Crosse man, but authorities said Sparta police made a mistake. They had copied the wrong license number. Police were scrambling now. All known sex offenders were picked up and questioned. Chief Talbot of the Highway Patrol told the paper that a window peeker had been prowling the southern end of the city for nearly a year. Quoting the paper now, at one home, his leering face appeared at a basement window, and he laughed at a woman who was ironing clothes and told her, "I'm going to get you." The story scared everyone, including the wife and family of Detective Sill.
Well, we were alone a lot of the time because he was working till late hours at night, and I think everyone had this fear of who was around or who if the guilty person was around, and our children were very much aware of it too. In fact, our 12-year-old son nailed all the basement windows shut and things like that.
As the fear spread through the area, efforts to find Evelyn increased. The Civil Air Patrol and a National Guard helicopter from Minneapolis were brought in to conduct an air search, while ground crews looked for anything that resembled a recent grave. Searchers even walked the sewer looking for Evelyn's body.
I was walking that storm sewer from the end all the way up to Farnham Street, with the assumption that possibly she was down in that storm sewer.
You were in it?
In the sewer itself. I walked that whole sewer from the south end of La Crosse up to, I guess it was Farnham Street.
On Tuesday, the 27th of October, Thomas Hartley made a public appeal. Dead or alive, he wanted his daughter back. On Wednesday, the FBI was poised to enter the case. They would use the Lindbergh Law. Meanwhile, the reward fund was growing. By Thursday, a plan to search every car in the county was undertaken. Service station operators would check the cars when they came to get gas. If the owner refused, they were reported to the police. If the car passed, a sticker was placed in the window reading, "My car is okay." The community interest in the case was intense. John Bossard was the district attorney, and it became his job to keep everyone informed.
And there just wasn't really much to identify or to take hold of. And of course, I wasn't in the investigating end particularly, kept informed, of course, as district attorney. But immediately a very intensive reaction occurred in the community, in the sheriff's department, in the city police department, in the district attorney's office. It was a very shocking thing. This young lady that was a model sort of a child, and her parents were well known and respected in the community. So it really gripped the soul of the community, I would say, when it happened. And as a result of that, a great deal of effort and energy and innovative investigation developed as a result of those factors that made it different than some mugging on the street or something of that sort. It just didn't happen in La Crosse.
Friday, October 30th, the State Crime Lab announced that it had cleared Mr. Hartley of any involvement in his daughter's disappearance. On Saturday, hopes for help from the FBI were dashed when they said they could not enter the case. Meanwhile, the Evelyn Hartley story had grown to one of national importance. The network television news sent crews to La Crosse to report the story, but all the attention didn't help solve the case. It brought the cranks out of the woodwork. Mr. Hartley began to receive letters like this one from Devil's Lake, North Dakota. The man wrote, "Just a note to let you know that Miss Hartley is in my power. Don't try to trace this letter because I didn't leave any evidence. I'll let you know the ransom later. You stupid people almost had me back there, but I managed to escape." It was signed with the skull and crossbones. Another letter from St. Paul read, "Don't worry anymore about that Evelyn Hartley. She went away with a man of La Crosse, is well and fine, and after all that commotion is afraid to come home, phone, or write. You will hear from her when all has calmed down. All that so-called evidence was planted to mislead. She wanted to be forgotten, is already sorry of her bargain. I would have written you before had I known." She signed it M.M. Could Evelyn have run off with a man?
She was a very fine girl, a girl of exceptional good character, and no one could say a bad word about Evelyn Hartley.
So she wouldn't have run off?
No, I would, in my estimation, that would be out of order.
In the next few weeks, police received what would become the last of the real clues in the Evelyn Hartley case. The first came when a man told police that he had seen a young couple walking between the homes in the Rasmussen neighborhood. It was about 7:30, the same night Evelyn disappeared. He said he thought the young girl had been drinking because she was unsteady and needed help walking. A few minutes later, the man said he saw the same two people in the back seat of a car as it sped away.
The car was described as an early 1940s Buick, and everyone who owned one was questioned, including a car mechanic from Duluth, but still no luck. Then police got their big break with the discovery of a pair of tennis shoes and an old blue denim jacket. They were found 14 miles from La Crosse along the side of Highway 14 near Coon Valley. Both the jacket and the shoes were stained with blood, the same type as Evelyn's. But more importantly, the shoes matched the footprints found both inside and outside of the Rasmussen home.
Yes, I've seen the tennis shoes.
Are you satisfied they are the tennis shoes that will...
I believe they are, for the reason that apparently some of the dirt, the ground dirt, that was picked up from the Hartley case, the Rasmussen house, I should say, supposedly matched the tennis shoes, which was explored by the laboratory.
But even these new clues failed to help solve the case. By May of 1954, with no solution in sight, authorities decided to polygraph all high school and college-age men in La Crosse. They conducted only about 300 of them before the school board put a stop to it. The community was getting angry, and the police were being openly criticized. And when a year had passed without a solution, the county decided to hire a special investigator.
I was probably instrumental in the hiring of Mr. Joseph because I felt that we were getting nowhere and that perhaps we needed more skilled investigators and more professional investigators. As you know, the sheriff is an elected person, doesn't necessarily have to have any particular skills in investigation. And in those days, it was a very small department, and they had other things to do. And so on a part-time basis, it was very difficult for them to expend the effort or to have the expertise that was desired.
A.M. Josephson got the job. He was a police detective and an expert with the polygraph. He worked the case full-time. His records are now kept in the evidence room of the La Crosse County Sheriff's Department.
Special Investigator Josephson worked on the case for many years, even after he was released by the county. These boxes contain just some of the evidence he gathered. There's photographic evidence from the day of the disappearance, letters from the FBI and the Wisconsin Crime Lab. But after all those years, Josephson became convinced that a steeplejack was responsible for Evelyn's possible demise, and he worked hours and took hundreds of photographs trying to prove that theory, a theory that to this day has never been proven.
These photographs show a man seated in a boatswain's chair. The boatswain's chair is used by steeplejacks. Notice the rope going to the chest. It's key to Josephson's theory. His theory is based on a faded mark found on the blue denim jacket. It appeared to Josephson that the original wearer of the jacket had worn a belt or a harness around the upper chest, underneath the jacket, the kind of thing that only a steeplejack or a person who worked in high places would wear. In July of 1957, Josephson went public with his theory, asking for the public's help. But again, no luck. And shortly after, the county eliminated his position.
In late 1957, Wisconsin's very own mass murderer, Ed Gein, was given a lie detector test to see if he could have been involved in the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley. But Gein passed the test and was cleared as a suspect. Over the years, hundreds, possibly thousands of people have been questioned. Some have even confessed to murdering Evelyn Hartley, but their confessions have never panned out. The most prevalent theory about Evelyn Hartley is that she lies buried here, somewhere underneath Jackson Street, since Jackson Street was under construction at the time. But there is another theory, a theory that one investigator told me no one has ever really thought about.
In 1984, the body of this unidentified woman was found in a roadside grave near Viroqua. Her hands were cut off, and her face was beaten badly. No one has ever claimed the body. Police believe the woman was in her late 50s or 60s. Evelyn would be 51. A police artist was needed to reconstruct the woman's face. If you compare a picture of young Evelyn to the old woman, you can see some basic similarities in the facial structure. The similarities are even more striking when you compare a picture of the unknown woman to Evelyn's mother. If the unknown woman was Evelyn Hartley, it raises more questions than it answers.
It's been nearly a year now since that report first aired, but the interest in Evelyn Hartley has not died. Since February, I have received at least one call a month, sometimes more, with information or questions about Evelyn Hartley. The most bizarre call came from a woman who wanted Evelyn's mother's home phone number. She said Evelyn was still alive. She knew her, and that Evelyn had to leave town because she got involved with the mafia. When I told the caller I doubted her story, she got mad and hung up. She's never called back. It's been 37 years now since Evelyn Hartley disappeared, and unless some new clues are found, it's likely her story, like the others, will remain a mystery. As before, the La Crosse Crime Stoppers unit is standing by tonight to take your calls if you have any information that could help solve these or other crimes. That's our report for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Good night. In 1953, a La Crosse babysitter disappeared with hardly a trace. Her name was Evelyn Hartley. This story generated more interest than any of the others. Within 24 hours of our broadcast, police received 17 calls with information about the babysitter's disappearance. In May, the authorities went to Pickwick, Minnesota, in search of a car that was reportedly buried with the body.
Pickwick, Minnesota is located about 35 to 40 minutes northwest of La Crosse, just south of the river city of Winona, Minnesota. Whoever abducted Evelyn Hartley took her away in a car, never to be seen again, so why not the back bayous of Pickwick? Authorities felt they had no choice but to check it out.
Roadblocks were already in place by 8:30 this morning. Authorities were letting no one into the dig site. From a ridge, you could see into White's Hollow, where just out of sight, authorities from both La Crosse and Winona County were searching for a buried car that, if found, might help solve the disappearance of Evelyn Hartley.
The original tipster did in fact mention the Hartley case, but not much emphasis was put on it, and we therefore do not want to formulate opinions on something that we don't know is concrete. So we took the basic information, keeping that particular case in mind, of course, pursued it as far as realistically possible. As we began to progress up the ladder, things kept falling into the place to where we actually got to the point where we knew for a fact that we had to unearth some turf. There's no doubt about it.
The Pickwick Inn in Pickwick, Minnesota became the media center. Television stations from Minneapolis, Rochester, La Crosse, and Albert Lee were represented. Both Minneapolis newspapers were there, and just about every radio station in the area. But after nearly 5 hours of digging, authorities gave up.
Well, as you know, we started about 9:30 this morning with a backhoe, and we trenched in an area of approximately 100 feet by 100 feet, where we believe this gully ran and the car allegedly was buried. We kind of crisscrossed it in a pattern and did test holes in various other places there, and we were unable to come up with anything but rock and dirt.
If we had to do the same thing all over again based on what we presently know, what we knew back in February, we'd have done the same thing, whether it was on this side of the river or the other side of the river. So there's no regrets there. It's just that nothing was found. We feel as if we've reached the height of this particular ladder, and we can't go any higher unless some more new information develops.
Authorities say they've done about as much as they can now with these new clues, and without more information, the Pickwick connection will become nothing more than another chapter in the Evelyn Hartley story. In Pickwick, Minnesota, Steve Bothun, Action 8 News.
It's just off the beaten path in a wooded area that at one time was a homestead of sorts built by a man named Percy Flynn. The remains of an old building still stand, but they lay rotting in ruins. It was near here in White's Hollow that investigators dug last May for a buried car. A car that some thought might contain the body of Evelyn Hartley.
Well, as you know, we had a person in here with a backhoe, and our source had told us that the site would probably be just a little ways from this building in the background here. And so we proceeded to dig a trench, probably a couple 100 feet long, 150 feet long. Started up by that tree up there. We also did another one in here. We did another one in here. We did like 4 trenches in a Y-shaped pattern here and came up with nothing but rock and sand.
You can still see where the trenches were dug. And the sheriff says he would have dug more if only it hadn't started to rain that day. He still has his suspicions that something is buried here, and he has consulted old aerial maps that show a dramatic change in the topography over the past 35 years.
Well, there's been numerous floods, and especially a big one in 1980 that took out the Pickwick Dam area. And I'm sure it did a lot of changing of the topography in here, too, because there are parts of cars and things down the line from here, too, that may have been what the people saw.
Another problem. This old building is not on the aerial map from 1954. And people who say a car is buried here say it was buried next to the building.
So it's pretty much all over as far as Evelyn Hartley goes.
In my opinion, this site had nothing to do with Evelyn Hartley.
something else maybe, but...
Well, that remains to be seen yet, too, I guess.
In Pickwick, Minnesota, Steve Bothun, Action 8 News.
Watch Final with Steve Bothun's investigative reports. Michelle Magadance reporting regional news from the Chippewa Valley. The Last Word on Sports with Mike Ducey. Wake Up Weather with Jim Crowley. And your News Watch Final anchor, Melissa Michaels.
Good evening again. A mystery within a mystery surrounds new information in the Evelyn Hartley case tonight. Steve Bothun joins us to explain. Steve?
Well, Melissa, as many people already know, that new clue has to do with the denim jacket and the tennis shoes allegedly worn by Evelyn's abductor. But the big mystery is, where are they now? We'll tell you about that later. But first, another look at that new clue, a clue that at least one law enforcement officer thinks has some merit. The new clue has to do with the old denim jacket and tennis shoes, believed to have been worn by the abductor of Evelyn Hartley. Two people told me they think they know who the jacket and tennis shoes belong to. The only catch is the two people had to be promised anonymity to tell me the story. Other than that, they wanted nothing in return for their information other than a chance to tell their story without suffering any repercussions. And their story seems credible enough to pass along without using the names. It all started with a private meeting last week, 2 days after the WKBT broadcast of Open File. Our sources told a simple story. A farmer they knew constantly wore a denim jacket and tennis shoes, just like the ones linked to the Hartley case. On the day of Evelyn's disappearance, the farmer was helping in the fields and obsessed with the idea of going to town that night and putting it in clean language now, finding a woman. But the work went on later than expected, and our sources said the farmer became very agitated. Finally, at about 6:30 that night, the farmer, still wearing his denim jacket and tennis shoes, left for town. Our sources recalled that he was driving a dark-colored 1938 Chevrolet. That night, at about 7:15, Evelyn Hartley disappeared. But our sources said they thought nothing more about it until 2 weeks later, when police found the old blue denim jacket and the tennis shoes along County Highway 14, not far from where they lived. Throughout the story, both people kept referring to the denim jacket the farmer wore as being worn, tattered, and cut off at the waist. From the pictures we aired in the Evelyn Hartley story, it appeared the denim jacket was a full-length work coat. But digging through old police reports, we found a picture clearly showing the jacket was indeed cut off at waist level. And our sources said it was just like the one the farmer wore. During the original investigation, much was made about a faded mark across the back of the jacket. A county investigator said it was made by a safety harness worn by a steeplejack. But our sources explained that many farmers still used horses back in 1953, and the faded mark on the jacket could have easily been made by a combination of harnesses or straps used to work the horses. But what really bothered these people is that after Evelyn Hartley disappeared, they say they never again saw the farmer wearing his old denim jacket and tennis shoes, nor was he ever seen driving that 1938 Chevrolet. At the time, police were searching for a car described as anywhere from a 1937 Ford to a 1941 Dodge. But exactly why this story was never reported to police back then is unclear. One of the people did say that in 1973, on the 20th anniversary of Evelyn Hartley's disappearance, they tried to tell the story to the La Crosse County District Attorney, but the District Attorney was not interested.
They said they finally took the story to me because after nearly 37 years, it still bothered them, and they would like to see someone look into it. But looking into it could prove to be a tough proposition because the farmer in question died more than 10 years ago. Now for the mystery of the denim jacket and the tennis shoes. Last year, when we first produced the Evelyn Hartley story, we tried to find them, but we were told the jacket and tennis shoes were still in the custody of the state crime lab in Madison. But when we called the crime lab, they told us the jacket and tennis shoes were sent back to La Crosse in the early 1960s.
So, Steve, I assume that means the shoes and the jacket are lost.
Well, I hope not. You know, a case that's 36 years old, there's a possibility that the jacket and tennis shoes are buried back in the corner under a pile of other things, dust and what else.